Starbucks is one of America's most influential corporations, a global symbol of coffee industry dominance and third-place culture. Its power was primarily forged by Howard Schultz, who transformed a small Seattle bean shop into a ruthless retail technology machine. Over 5 decades, Starbucks has reshaped the service industry and pioneered financial technology. Its multi-billion-dollar valuation is secured through a complex digital ecosystem that holds over $1.5 billion in customer deposits, essentially operating as a massive unregulated bank. Its tangible footprint includes tens of thousands of stores and lavish reserve roasteries. Despite that success, the company's history is marked by brutal labor wars and persistent political boycotts. The genesis of the very market Starbucks came to dominate, and the dark roasted coffee that fueled it, begins not with the company itself, but with a different man entirely, Alfred Peet. Peet, a Dutch immigrant, had grown up in the coffee and tea trade in Europe. When he moved to Berkeley, California, he was appalled by the state of American coffee. In the 1950s and 60s, American coffee was dominated by mass-market, pre-ground coffee sold in tins, such as Folgers and Maxwell House. The product was weak, stale, and prioritized shelf life over quality. In 1966, Peet opened Peet's Coffee, Tea, and Spice in Berkeley. He was a purist. He introduced Americans to high-quality whole bean Arabica coffee, imported from small-batch growers. Most importantly, he introduced his signature deep roast, or dark roast, a style that caramelized the bean's sugars, producing a strong, intense, and, to many Americans, revolutionary flavor. Peet's was not a cafe, it was a merchant. He taught his customers how to brew, what to buy, and why quality mattered. Across the country in Seattle, 3 young men were inspired by this new movement. They were Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker. The 3 were partners, friends who shared a passion for high-quality food, wine, and coffee. They visited Alfred Peet in Berkeley and were trained by him. Peet became their mentor, and for the first year of their operation, their sole supplier of green coffee beans. In 1971, the 3 partners opened the first Starbucks store in Seattle's Pike Place market. They named their company Starbucks Coffee, Tea, and Spice. The name Starbucks was taken from the first mate in Herman Melville's novel, Moby Dick. The original logo, a twin-tailed mermaid or siren, was chosen to evoke the seafaring, adventurous nature of the old coffee trade. Following Peet's model, the original Starbucks was not a cafe. It was a retail store. The business did not sell brewed coffee, except for small free samples. The business model was 100% focused on retail sales. They sold high-quality, dark-roasted whole coffee beans, which they roasted in store. They also sold loose-leaf teas and various spices. The company's entire philosophy was built on the foundation laid by Peet, quality expertise, and a dark roast profile that was foreign to most American consumers. The store was a success for what it was. It attracted a niche, loyal following of coffee purists who appreciated the quality. The 3 founders were not empire builders. They were hobbyists who had turned their passion into a viable small business. By 1980, they had expanded to 4 stores in Seattle. They were respected, profitable, and had established a clear brand identity, but they remained a local retail-focused operation. Their business was selling a product, not an experience. This model would be challenged and ultimately destroyed by the man who would come to define the brand. In 1981, Howard Schultz was a 28-year-old vice president and general manager for the U.S. operations of Hammerplast, a Swedish company that manufactured kitchen equipment and housewares, including plastic cone drip coffee makers. Schultz, a sharp and ambitious salesman from Brooklyn, noticed a curious data point. A small four-store retailer in Seattle was ordering an unusually large number of his company's drip coffee makers and filters, more than any other client, including department stores. Intrigued, Schultz flew from New York to Seattle to see the operation for himself. When he walked into the Pike Place Market store, Schultz had what he would later describe as an epiphany. He was struck by the aroma of the dark roasted beans, the expertise of the staff, and the deep, passionate relationship the company had with its customers. The founders gave him a cup of coffee, a Sumatra dark roast. Schultz, who had grown up with instant coffee, had never tasted anything like it. He was captivated. Schultz believed this small Seattle company had a soul and a product that could be scaled nationally. He spent the next year relentlessly persuading the founders to hire him. The founders were, justifiably, hesitant. Jerry Baldwin, the company's leader, was a purist. He feared that Schultz, with his slick New York sales background, was too focused on growth and money. Baldwin was focused on quality. He worried that rapid expansion would force them to compromise the product. In 1982, Schultz finally convinced them. He took a significant pay cut to join Starbucks as the director of retail operations and marketing. He was now on the inside, tasked with expanding the company's retail footprint. A year later, in 1983, the company sent Schultz on a housewares trade show and buying trip to Milan, Italy. This trip would become the single most important event in the company's history. When Schultz arrived in Milan, he didn't just see a trade show, he saw Italian coffee culture. He observed that espresso bars were on nearly every corner. He saw the baristas who operated the complex steaming espresso machines with theatrical flair. He saw the relationship these baristas had with their customers, whom they greeted by name, and he saw the experience. The bars were hubs of social activity. People would stop for a quick espresso, a cappuccino, a brief conversation. It was, he realized, a core part of the Italian social fabric. Schultz had his second epiphany. Starbucks was in the wrong business. He realized the true potential was not in selling beans. It was in selling the experience. It was in replicating the romance, the theater, and the community of the Italian espresso bar. He saw a vision for a third place, a social hub that was not home and not work. He returned to Seattle energized and presented his new vision to the founders. The founders, particularly Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker, immediately rejected the idea. They were coffee purists who saw themselves as merchants, not restaurateurs. They argued that turning their retail stores into noisy, steamy espresso bars would ruin the soul of the brand. Schultz pleaded, and after months of debate, they allowed him a tiny 300-square-foot corner in their newest store for an experiment in 1984. The experiment was an immediate, unqualified success, with lines for lattes stretching out the door. This success, however, was the catalyst for the final split. For Schultz, it was proof of his multi-billion-dollar vision. For the founders, it was a validation of their worst fears. The beverage business had proven it would completely overshadow their core bean business. They refused to roll out the concept. This created an unbridgeable schism. It was a zero-sum game between two irreconcilable futures, forcing Schultz, the company's true visionary, out the door. But it also set the stage for the ultimate irony. 2 years later, when the founders decided to focus on Peet's Coffee, they sold the Starbucks name to the only man who understood the potential they were abandoning. He was convinced his vision for an American espresso bar was the future. With his own savings and some seed money, he started his own company, Il Giornale. The company was, in every respect, the realization of his Italian dream. The stores were designed to look like Milanese bars. The menu was in Italian. The staff wore white shirts and bow ties. Il Giornale was a success, and Schultz opened a few locations. He was proving his model worked. Then in 1987, a critical opportunity emerged. The Starbucks founders, Jerry Baldwin and Gordon Bowker, had a divided passion. In 1984, they had managed to purchase their original mentor's company, Peet's Coffee. Baldwin, in particular, had always been more aligned with Alfred Peet's purist philosophy. The founders decided to sell their Starbucks retail operation, all 6 stores, the roasting plant, and the name, to focus entirely on running Peet's. They put Starbucks up for sale for $3.8 million. When Schultz heard the news, he immediately moved to acquire the company. He did not have $3.8 million. He went back to the investors who had funded Il Giornale. He had to convince them to fund the acquisition of the very company he had just left. He secured a crucial investment from Bill Gates Sr., the father of the Microsoft co-founder. With the financing secured, Howard Schultz's Il Giornale Corporation purchased Starbucks in August 1987. The first thing Schultz did was change the company's name. All his Il Giornale stores were rebranded as Starbucks. He was now the CEO of the Starbucks Corporation. This was the true beginning of the modern Starbucks. The company was no longer a retail bean seller. It was a beverage company. Schultz immediately implemented his third-place vision. He combined the quality-focused, dark roast bean sourcing of the original Starbucks with the Italian espresso bar experience of Il Giornale. The business model was now a hybrid. It was a service business that also sold high-margin retail products. Schultz's vision was to make Starbucks a lifestyle brand. He wanted to provide a space for quiet, affordable luxury. He introduced comfortable seating, allowing customers to linger. He curated in-store music. He standardized the drink names and processes. This repositioning was revolutionary. In 1987, the company's revenue was $1.3 million. Under Schultz's new leadership, the company's growth became explosive. He was not just selling coffee, he was selling an experience, a predictable, comfortable, premium third place that, as he correctly predicted, the American middle class was craving. The original founders had built a foundation of quality. Schultz, the salesman, took that foundation and built an empire on top of it. Howard Schultz's 1987 takeover and subsequent repositioning of Starbucks was an undisputed commercial success. The company went public with its IPO in 1992, and the 1990s were a period of explosive, almost unchecked growth. The third place concept was a cultural phenomenon, but this rapid expansion, built on the singular vision of one man, created a foundation of internal friction and external vulnerability that would define the company for the next 3 decades. The internal drama at Starbucks began the moment Howard Schultz disagreed with the original founders. The 1985 conflict was a fundamental clash of philosophies. The founders, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker, were product-focused purists. They believed their business was selling high-quality, dark-roasted coffee beans. Howard Schultz was a beverage and marketing-focused salesman. He believed their business was selling a lifestyle experience. When the founders rejected his plan to turn the retail stores into Italian-style espresso bars, Schultz left to form his rival company, Il Giornale. His 1987 return was not just a purchase. It was a hostile takeover of the brand's philosophy. He bought the company from the founders, who wanted to focus on running Peet's Coffee, and immediately remade Starbucks in his own image. This set a precedent. The company's direction was intrinsically tied to the personal vision of Howard Schultz. He was not just the CEO, he was the brand's chief ideologue. This reliance on a single visionary leader became a structural problem. In 2000, After a decade of massive success, Schultz stepped down as CEO to become Chief Global Strategist. He passed the leadership to Orrin Smith and then Jim Donald. These men were operators. They were skilled at managing the supply chain, opening new stores, and optimizing quarterly results. Under their leadership, the company continued to grow, but the focus shifted from experience to efficiency. The third place concept was diluted. Stores were designed to maximize throughput, getting customers in and out as fast as possible. The smell of coffee was replaced by the smell of breakfast sandwiches. The unique curated music was replaced by standardized corporate playlists. The company had lost, as Schultz would later say, its soul. This internal drift was exposed by the 2008 financial crisis. The company had overexpanded, often opening stores across the street from each other. Its premium product was now just an expensive coffee that people couldn't afford for a public facing a recession. The stock price collapsed, losing nearly 80% of its value. The company was on the brink of irrelevance. This crisis prompted one of the most significant internal dramas in the company's history. In January 2008, Howard Schultz staged a corporate comeback. He had the board fire CEO Jim Donald and dramatically reinstated himself as chief executive. His return was framed as a savior narrative. He was the original visionary, returning to save the company's soul from the bean counters who had ruined it. This move, while stabilizing the company, reinforced its core structural weakness. Everything depended on Schultz. His leadership style, while passionate, was deeply personal and often viewed as autocratic. He was the only one who truly understood the brand. This pattern repeated itself. Schultz successfully steered the company through the crisis, but in 2017, he stepped down as CEO again, passing the role to Kevin Johnson. Johnson, the former CEO of Juniper Networks and a Microsoft executive, was a tech CEO. He was hired to navigate the new world of digital, mobile, and delivery. Johnson's tenure was defined by massive external challenges, primarily the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced a complete shutdown and reinvention of the company's service model. Johnson's retirement in March 2022 triggered the most chaotic leadership period in the company's history. Howard Schultz returned for his third time as interim CEO. This created a revolving door at the top. The company had 3 different CEOs in a 5-year span. In October 2022, Laxman Narasimhan, an outsider from Reckitt Benckiser, was hired as the next CEO. However, Schultz did not immediately step down. He remained as interim CEO for months, creating a confusing and widely criticized shadow leadership situation. When Narasimhan officially took over in 2023, he inherited a company with deep operational and morale issues. He immediately announced a cost-cutting plan, including the layoff of 1,100 corporate jobs in an attempt to streamline the organization. The analysis is clear. This constant leadership instability, particularly the company's reliance on Schultz as a recurring savior, had a direct negative impact. Employee morale plummeted. As the outline data indicates, employee turnover became extremely high, reportedly reaching 100% in some sectors in 2022. This constant churn at the top created a demotivated and unstable workforce, which in turn damaged operational efficiency and customer service. While the company was dealing with its internal leadership drama, it was also under assault from a series of severe external challenges. The first was the 2008 crisis itself. It was an external market shock that exposed the internal rot of overexpansion. Starbucks had become a victim of its own success. Its response, led by Schultz's return, was brutal and necessary. He famously ordered the simultaneous closure of all 7,100 U.S. stores for an afternoon in February 2008, forcing all 135,000 baristas to be retrained on how to pour a perfect espresso. This was a massive, costly, and public admission of failure. He then ordered the closure of 600 underperforming U.S. stores, a move that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. The second and more persistent external challenge has been the brand's cultural identity. The company's premium pricing model, while effective, made it a constant target for criticism. But a deeper problem was the phenomenon of Starbucksization. As the company expanded, its uniform green and white logo became a symbol of corporate globalization. Critics accused Starbucks of being a predatory retailer, moving into urban neighborhoods and small towns, driving up commercial rents, and pushing out local independent cafes. This sentiment was particularly strong in Europe, where countries like Italy and France resisted the brand's encroachment for years, seeing it as an assault on their own deep-seated coffee cultures. The third and most potent external challenge is labor. For decades, Starbucks built its brand on being a progressive employer. It was one of the first American companies to offer comprehensive healthcare benefits and stock options to part-time employees. It called its employees partners, a term meant to signify a level of respect and shared ownership. This progressive image was the company's primary shield against criticism. In 2021, that shield was shattered. A grassroots unionization movement led by Starbucks Workers United began at a store in Buffalo, New York. Despite the company's partner rhetoric, the movement exposed deep-seated employee grievances over low pay, unsafe staffing levels, and a feeling of being disrespected by corporate management. The company's reaction was not progressive. Starbucks management, including Howard Schultz himself, adopted a strong anti-union stance. The company has been accused of aggressive and illegal union-busting tactics. The National Labor Relations Board has filed hundreds of complaints against the company, citing it for firing pro-union organizers, shutting down unionizing stores, and refusing to bargain in good faith. This bitter and costly war of attrition continued for 3 years, destroying the progressive employer narrative and becoming a major operational distraction. The stalemate finally broke in early 2024. In a stunning and historic reversal, Starbucks management, now under new leadership, agreed to cease its aggressive anti-union campaign and enter negotiations. Both sides announced a new framework intended to achieve collective bargaining agreements. This move was a direct admission that the multi-year fight was unwinnable, legally indefensible, and too damaging to the brand. It signaled a new era, forcing the company to finally reckon with the massive gap between its partner rhetoric and its operational reality. Finally, the company's sheer size has made it a target for political and social boycotts. As a globally recognized symbol of American capitalism, Starbucks is often caught in the crossfire of geopolitical events. The most significant recent example, as noted in the outline, was the 2023 boycott related to the Israel-Hamas war. Following the October 7th attack, the Starbucks Workers United Union posted a message expressing solidarity with Palestine on social media. The company, in response, sued its own union for trademark infringement, arguing that the post confused customers and damaged the brand. This move backfired, triggering a massive global boycott movement. The financial impact was direct and severe. The outline's data suggests this and other social pressures contributed to a 5 to 10% drop in revenue, and the company's market value temporarily fell by billions. These external pressures were compounded by basic business risks. The company is built on a volatile agricultural commodity, coffee. As the outline highlights, inflation in coffee bean prices in 2024 to 2025 directly threatened the company's profit margins, forcing it to pass price hikes onto already critical customers. These internal and external crises, leadership chaos, cultural backlash, a labor revolt, and supply chain vulnerability created a perfect storm. The company that had defined the 20th century premium market was struggling to survive in the 21st. Its very survival depended on a radical series of pivots and recovery strategies. And the most important recovery strategy of all, the one that defined the company for decades, was the one forged in the fire of its first great collapse, the 2008 financial crisis. The explosive success of the 1990s, built on Howard Schultz's third-place vision, masked a series of deep structural problems. When Schultz stepped down as CEO in 2000, he passed leadership to operators Orrin Smith and later Jim Donald. Under their management, the company's focus fundamentally shifted. The priority was no longer the experience, it was throughput and efficiency. This new focus manifested in several ways. The unique curated atmosphere of the stores was diluted. New stores were built for speed, not comfort. The complex manual espresso machines, which provided theater and a sense of craft, were replaced with faster automated machines. While these new machines cut down service times, they also produced a, by Schultz's own admission, inferior product. Most critically, the company introduced hot breakfast sandwiches. These sandwiches were profitable, but they created an aroma that overpowered the smell of coffee, a move that Schultz later called a catastrophic dilution of the brand. Simultaneously, the company engaged in a reckless, unchecked expansion. It was opening new stores at a staggering rate, often cannibalizing its own sales by building a new location directly across the street from an existing one. By 2007, Starbucks had become a victim of its own success, bloated, standardized, and having lost the premium soul that had justified its premium price. The 2008 financial crisis was the external shock that exposed this internal rot. As the global economy collapsed, consumer credit vanished, and a deep recession began, the premium $4 latte was no longer an affordable luxury. It was an easy expense for customers to cut. Starbucks' sales plummeted, and its stock price collapsed, losing nearly 80% of its value from its peak. The company was no longer a growth darling. It was a symbol of pre-recession excess, and it was on the brink of irrelevance. This crisis prompted the most significant internal drama in the company's history. In January 2008, the board fired CEO Jim Donald. In a dramatic move, Howard Schultz was reinstated as chief executive. His return was framed not just as a corporate restructuring, but as a moral crusade. He publicly stated that the company had lost its soul and that he was the only one who could save it. Schultz's recovery plan was immediate, brutal, and public. It was a direct response to the problems he had identified. First, he addressed the operational and spiritual failure. On February 26, 2008, he executed one of the most famous symbolic acts in modern corporate history. He ordered the simultaneous closure of all 7,100 U.S. stores for 3 hours. This was not a random decision. During this shutdown, all 135,000 U.S. baristas were retrained in the art of the perfect espresso. This event was a massive, costly, and public admission of failure. It cost the company an estimated $6 million in lost revenue. But the message was clear. The era of throughput was over, and the focus was returning to product quality. Second, he tackled the financial bloat caused by overexpansion. Schultz made the decision to do what his predecessors would not: retreat. He ordered the closure of 600 underperforming stores in the United States, followed by another 300 globally. This was a direct admission that the growth at all costs strategy had been a failure, and it was a necessary move to restore profitability. Third, he addressed the dilution of the product. He immediately had the new breakfast sandwiches taken off the menu. He brought back a focus on coffee, reintroducing lower volume, manual pour-over brewing methods for coffee purists, and decommissioning many of the automated machines he despised. Fourth, as the user outlined details, he diversified the company's offerings to widen its appeal beyond just coffee. He approved a significant expansion of the menu to include healthier options, such as salads and new food pairings. This was a strategic move to capture a broader, more cost-conscious customer base that might no longer come for a premium coffee, but could be convinced to come for a healthy, fast casual lunch. Finally, he heavily invested in the company's nascent digital loyalty program. This was a critical piece of the recovery. The Starbucks card and its attached reward system became the primary tool for retaining customers during the recession. As the user data notes, this loyalty program was a key driver of the recovery, building a data-driven connection to customers and increasing visit frequency. This program alone would be responsible for a significant percentage of the company's future revenue growth. Schultz's strategy was a high-risk gamble, but it worked. By focusing on the customer experience, cutting the fat, and investing in loyalty, he stabilized the supertanker. As the outline data confirms, the company's recovery was remarkably fast. After a painful period of restructuring, Starbucks posted a 15% growth in 2010, signaling that the crisis was over. The company that emerged from the 2008 fire was leaner, more disciplined, and, with its new digital tools, more powerful than ever. It was now ready to pivot from domestic recovery to its ultimate goal: global dominance. Following the 2008 recovery, Starbucks was a leaner, more disciplined company. With its U.S. operations stabilized, Howard Schultz and his team executed the second phase of their comeback: aggressive and intelligent global expansion. The goal was no longer just to open stores, it was to conquer new continents, specifically Asia, which was identified as the company's primary growth engine for the next century. This strategy was built on two pillars: globalization and digital integration. First, the company had to learn from its most expensive failures. Its initial global expansion in the late 1990s and early 2000s was often arrogant. In Australia, for example, Starbucks entered the market with a one-size-fits-all American model, opening dozens of stores rapidly. It was a disaster. The local Australian market already had a deep, sophisticated, and independent espresso culture. Starbucks was seen as a weak American imitation, and the company was forced to close 70% of its Australian stores in 2008, a humiliating and costly retreat. The company learned its lesson. To win globally, it had to act locally. This globalization strategy became the blueprint for its new expansion. The most critical example is China. Starbucks entered China in 1999, a market that had no coffee culture. It was a nation of tea drinkers. The company's strategy was not to sell coffee, it was to sell status. A Starbucks cup was deliberately marketed as a symbol of being modern, Western, and affluent. The stores themselves were not the small, fast-paced third places of the U.S. They were often massive, plush, two-story locations with comfortable seating, designed for long social gatherings. Starbucks also adapted its menu. As the user see outline notes, it introduced products that appealed to local tastes, such as matcha green tea lattes in Japan and mooncakes during China's Mid-Autumn Festival. In India, recognizing the complexity of the market, Starbucks did not go in alone. It formed a 50-50 joint venture with the Tata Group, one of India's largest and most respected conglomerates. This gave the brand immediate credibility, access to the best real estate, and a partner that understood the local supply chain. This globalization strategy was the engine of its growth. As the outline data indicates, the company's expansion in Asia, particularly in China, fueled a 15% annual growth rate for the region. This single market, which had 0 stores in 1998, grew to over 6,500 stores by 2023, becoming the company's second largest market and its most important driver of new revenue. The second pillar of its global dominance was technology. Starbucks understood that its third place concept was no longer just physical. It had to be digital. The company aggressively exported its digital ecosystem alongside its coffee beans. The Starbucks mobile app was a key weapon in its global expansion. In markets like China and Japan, mobile payment adoption was already high. Starbucks leveraged this by integrating its loyalty program and mobile order and pay features into these markets. This was not just a convenience, it was a powerful tool for data collection. By getting millions of new users in Asia onto its app, Starbucks gained an unprecedented insight into the emerging consumer habits of the new global middle class. It could track what products were popular, test new promotions, and build a one-on-one digital relationship with customers in 80 different countries. As the user outline notes, the app's 30 million users are not just in the US. They are a global network that combined makes Starbucks a dominant force in digital payments. This combination of flexible, localized menus and a unified, data-driven digital platform was the ultimate formula for success. By 2024, the recovery was complete. The company that had been on the brink of collapse in 2008 had transformed into a global behemoth with 38,000 stores in over 80 countries, generating $36 billion in annual revenue. As the data indicates, it had successfully captured approximately 20% of the entire global coffee market. This success meant the company was no longer just a coffee company. It had to pivot into entirely new industries. But to understand these new pivots, we must first go back in time. We need to examine a $10 million mistake from 1999 that paradoxically taught Starbucks its most valuable lesson and provided the blueprint for its entire 21st century strategy. By the late 1990s, Starbucks faced a structural problem: market saturation. The company's core business of selling premium coffee, while highly profitable, could not sustain its aggressive growth targets indefinitely. In its home market, the United States, there was a finite number of street corners that could support a store. As the user outline notes, the slowing 3% annual growth in this core market was a clear indicator that the original business model was maturing. To continue its trajectory and justify its high stock valuation to Wall Street, Starbucks was forced to find new revenue streams. This began a multi-decade strategy of diversification, moving the company far beyond coffee. This diversification was not accidental. It was a deliberate pivot into two new high-margin industries: entertainment and content, and more critically, financial technology and data. The first major pivot was into the music industry. This move was an attempt to vertically integrate a core component of the third place experience. In the 1990s, Starbucks had already differentiated itself from competitors by carefully curating its in-store music. The company's staff moved away from generic Muzak and developed sophisticated playlists of jazz, blues, and world music. This auditory atmosphere became a key brand signifier. Customers began asking where they could buy the music they were hearing, leading Starbucks to sell compilation CDs at the checkout counter. This simple, high-margin, ancillary sale proved the market existed. Based on this success, Howard Schultz saw an opportunity to move from a curator to a producer. In 1999, Starbucks acquired a small San Francisco music company called Hear Music for $10 million. The reason for this acquisition, as the user's outline states, was to expand the third place from a simple coffee shop into a comprehensive entertainment hub. The financial goal was clear: increase customer dwell time. The analysis suggested that a customer who stayed 20 to 30% longer was significantly more likely to purchase a second item. The Hear Music label was a tool to maximize the profit per square foot of its existing real estate. The effectiveness of this strategy was for a short time immense. Starbucks had a retail footprint that no traditional record store could match. By 2007, this venture reached its absolute peak when the Hear Music label co-released Paul McCartney's album Memory Almost Full, poaching a legacy artist from a major label. It was a landmark event. But this peak was a mirage. The entire strategy was built on a foundation that was already collapsing: physical media. The timing was catastrophic. Starbucks acquired the company in 1999, just as digital music was being born. It reached its peak in 2007, the same year the iPhone launched, and digital streaming began its inevitable takeover. The company was aggressively investing in selling $15 plastic discs in a world that had already decided plastic discs were obsolete. In July 2008, as the global economy was melting down and Starbucks itself was fighting for its life, the Hear Music division was an indefensible vanity project. Starbucks sold the label to Concord Music Group. As the outline data indicates, the venture resulted in a $10 million loss. This was not just a minor misstep, it was a profound strategic failure. Starbucks was correct in its reason. That music was a core part of its lifestyle brand, but it was disastrously wrong in its execution. It had bet on the medium instead of the experience. However, this $10 million loss was perhaps the most important investment Starbucks ever made. It was the expensive, painful tuition fee that taught the company a lesson that would define its entire 21st century strategy. The failure of Hear Music provided a crystal clear blueprint for all future pivots. The first and simplest lesson was to stop trying to be a retailer of physical content, an insight that led directly to its later successful partnership with the digital platform Spotify. A deeper lesson quickly followed. Why just partner with someone else's platform when Starbucks could build its own? Instead of selling music, the company realized it should be building a proprietary digital ecosystem to sell coffee and gather data. This new understanding was the genesis of the fintech pivot and the all-powerful Starbucks app. Finally, the company learned that if digital content like music could become free, the physical experience of the store must become exponentially more valuable, unique, and theatrical to justify its existence. This insight was the genesis of the pivot to hyper-local design and the multi-million-dollar Reserve roasteries. The $10 million mistake taught Starbucks a golden rule: stop selling physical content and start building a digital platform. That lesson was the genesis of its greatest pivot, the move from selling coffee to becoming a financial technology giant. And it began very quietly, even before the Hear Music failure was complete. The $10 million failure of Hear Music taught Starbucks its most valuable lesson: do not bet on a physical medium in a world that is rapidly digitizing. The company was correct that its value was in lifestyle, but it learned that the future of that lifestyle was not in retail products, but on a technology platform. This lesson arrived just as Starbucks faced an existential threat. Its core U.S. market was saturated. As the outline states, with a slow 3% annual growth rate, the company could not simply build stores forever. To survive and grow, it had to execute its most profound pivot, a fundamental re-engineering of its business model from retail to financial technology. This pivot began quietly in 2001 with the Starbucks card. On the surface, it was a simple reloadable gift card, but structurally, it was a financial instrument. When a customer loads $50 onto a card, Starbucks holds that cash until it is spent. This revelation is the single most shocking and brilliant pivot in the company's modern history. It reframes the entire business model, showing that Starbucks is no longer just a coffee company. It is a masterclass in financial engineering. The pivot began quietly in 2001 with the physical Starbucks card, but it truly ignited in 2011 with the mobile app. The app's genius was merging its payment system with its powerful loyalty program. This integration created a powerful incentive for customers to preload money, transforming them from simple purchasers into, effectively, creditors. The result is a float, a pool of customer cash held by the company, that exceeds $1.5 billion. This is not just a rounding error, it is a core business pillar. The most staggering fact, the one that underlines the sheer scale of this operation, is that this $1.5 billion float is larger than the total deposits held by 85% of all U.S. banks. What Starbucks has built is, in effect, one of the world's largest unregulated financial instruments. It operates as a quasi-bank, but with one massive advantage. This $1.5 billion is a massive zero-interest loan from the public. Starbucks pays nothing for this capital. It can use this free money to fund its own operations, accelerate global expansion, and invest in technology, all without paying a single cent of interest to a traditional bank. This pivot reveals the company's true 21st century product. The coffee is just the popular physical medium used to get tens of millions of users onto its highly profitable, closed-loop financial platform. The true revolution, however, was the launch of the Starbucks mobile app in 2011. This app integrated the payment card with the Starbucks Rewards loyalty program, and its effectiveness was staggering. This is the key. The app successfully shifted the customer from a retail purchaser to an ecosystem user. The mobile order and pay feature was an operational breakthrough. As the script notes, it solved the single biggest bottleneck in the store, the queue. It dramatically increased throughput, or the number of customers a store could serve per hour. But the app's primary function was data harvesting. It became a massive data mining machine. For the first time, Starbucks could track individual customer behavior, what they buy, when, what promotions they respond to. Every coffee purchase became a data point. This allowed the company to personalize offers, to drive specific behaviors, gamifying consumption. This was the core 21st century pivot. The company had successfully reduced its dependency on coffee sales. The user's data was now as valuable, if not more valuable, than the coffee bean itself. As the outline data confirms, this pivot directly fueled a 30% rise in services revenue. However, by becoming a fintech company, Starbucks inherited fintech problems. As the outline notes, a 2023 hack exposed the significant data security risk of holding the personal and financial data of over 31 million users. While Starbucks was aggressively building this digital empire, it faced a parallel challenge. If the app makes coffee a commodity, why should anyone bother to visit the physical store? This forced them to execute a simultaneous defensive pivot to save the original third place itself. Parallel to the digital revolution, Starbucks executed a defensive pivot to save its original brand promise. By 2007, the romantic vision that once defined Starbucks had faded. It had been diluted by Starbucksization, the very efficiency and uniformity that led to the 2008 crisis. The experience had been replaced by fast food throughput. To counter the criticism of homogenization and critically to re-justify its premium price, Starbucks was forced to evolve the third place. This was Pivot 1.2. The action was twofold. First, and most dramatically, the company created massive multi-million-dollar flagship stores called Starbucks Reserve Roasteries. These are not coffee shops. They are temples to coffee. They are part manufacturing plant, part tourist destination, and part theatrical performance. The goal of these roasteries is not to serve the daily commuter. Their goal is to create a brand halo. The existence of these opulent temples, where a single specialty brew might cost $20, acts as a psychological anchor. It makes the everyday $5 latte at a regular store feel more premium, more artisanal, and more justified. It is a brilliant strategy of using high-end real estate to elevate the perceived value of the mass market product. Second, at the regular store level, the company abandoned the cookie-cutter design. It began investing heavily in hyper-local architecture, designing new stores to reflect the local culture, using local materials and artists. The effectiveness of this design strategy was significant. As the outline data confirms, this focus on unique design increased customer loyalty by 10 to 20% in culturally sensitive markets. It helped the company shed its urban homogenization image and reinforce the idea that a visit to Starbucks was once again a premium experience. The convergence of these events, the global growth slowdown, the explosive competitive threat from Luckin in China, the internal labor revolt, and the damaging 2023 boycotts created a perfect storm for the company. But the most critical existential problem was one of Starbucks' own making. The fintech pivot had become too successful, and it was overwhelming and breaking the experience pivot. The original third place was designed for leisurely connection. The modern store was now a high-stress logistics hub, being crushed by an invisible wave of digital orders. Baristas were drowning. They were caught in an impossible crossfire of mobile orders, delivery tickets, drive-through requests, and in-person customers all demanding complex, highly customized cold drinks. The third place had become a high-stress factory. This operational failure led directly to two catastrophic outcomes: plummeting employee morale and slow, chaotic service. This set the stage for the latest and most operationally focused pivot in the company's history. When new CEO Laxman Narasimhan took over, he inherited a company whose digital interface was writing checks its physical engine couldn't cash. His response was not a romantic Milan-inspired vision like Schultz's. It was an engineer's solution to a systems problem. In late 2023, Narasimhan launched the $3 billion triple-shot reinvention plan, a massive capital expenditure program rolling out through 2024 and 2025. This entire plan is a pivot focused on one thing: speed and efficiency. The core of this plan is the Siren system, a complete data-driven redesign of the barista workspace. It is not about aesthetics. It is about motion. The new layout relocates high-use ingredients and installs new, faster equipment such as automated cold brew makers, quieter blenders, and new syrup dispensers, all designed to dramatically reduce the time, steps, and physical strain needed to make a complex drink. This triple shot pivot is a direct multi-billion-dollar admission that the company's digital success had broken its physical operations. It is a fundamental effort to finally make the engine of the store as fast, reliable, and efficient as the interface of the app, ensuring the company's survival in a new era defined not just by experience, but by speed. The 50-year history of Starbucks, from a single bean-selling shop in Seattle to a 38,000-store global empire, provides a clear set of lessons in modern business. The company's survival has been dependent on three core strategies: a willingness to fundamentally reposition its identity, a diversification model tied directly to its core value, and a constant defensive adaptation to global criticism. The first and most critical lesson from Starbucks is the strategic value of repositioning and flexible leadership. The company as it exists today is the result of its first and most important pivot. The original founders, Jerry Baldwin, Zev Siegel, and Gordon Bowker, had a successful business model, selling high-quality whole bean coffee to a niche market. Howard Schultz's 1987 takeover was not just an acquisition, it was a fundamental rejection of that model. He repositioned the company from a product to a service. This pivot created the company. The second lesson is in diversification based on a core value. Starbucks' attempts to grow beyond coffee have been a study in contrasts, providing a clear rule: expansion only works when it enhances the lifestyle identity. The company's failures are as instructive as its successes. The Hear Music venture, as detailed in the user's outline, was a logical extension of the third-place atmosphere, but a disaster in execution. Its $10 million loss was the price of betting on a dying medium and miscalculating the company's role. Customers wanted Starbucks to curate music, not sell it. The third lesson is in managing brand integrity and globalization. As one of the most recognizable American brands, Starbucks is a global target. Its history is defined by its reaction to two major criticisms: cultural homogenization and its ethical image. The criticism of Starbucksization taught the company that uniformity is a liability. Its initial global expansion model, which exported a one-size-fits-all American cafe, failed in sophisticated markets like Australia. The recovery from this failure created the glocalization strategy. This is the lesson that dictates the menu in Tokyo or India. It is also the lesson that forced the company to abandon cookie-cutter store designs and invest in the hyper-local and boutique architecture mentioned in the outline, a move that data showed increased loyalty by 10 to 20% in key markets. Furthermore, the company learned to use transparency as a marketing defense. In response to decades of criticism about its supply chain, Starbucks invested heavily in becoming 99% ethical in its coffee sourcing by 2025. This 99% figure, which it promotes heavily, is a powerful piece of corporate social responsibility. It is a direct, data-driven defense against criticism, designed to build brand integrity that can be deployed during a crisis. When the company faces boycotts or social media backlash, it can point to its sourcing program as proof of its ethical nature. Ultimately, the history of Starbucks shows that the company's product is not coffee. Its product is a global technology-driven lifestyle platform. The coffee is merely the medium of exchange. The lessons from its failures and its successes all point to one conclusion: the company's value is derived from its real estate, its digital ecosystem, and its mastery of the experience economy. The 2025 streamlining plan under Narasimhan, as the outline concludes, is the final lesson. The company must remain lean, flexible, and technologically integrated to protect that core value, ensuring its long-term growth.